I don't know.
At least it wasn't one of us.
My cat's got the zoomies. I don't know if you saw that in the back corner.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
Welcome, everybody, to the newest episode of Letterboxd. I'm your host, Parker, joined by my good buddy. Shit.
You, Parker. Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of LetterBros, where we spin a wheel to decide what movie we will watch next based off the top 100 movies of all time. I am Felix. I'm joined, as always, by my good buddy, Parker. How are we doing, buddy?
Doing great. How are you?
Living high and living low.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Much like this movie that we are going to be going over today. If you caught us on our last episode, we drew a movie called High and Low. It's a Kurosawa film from 1963, and it's a milestone for this show because it is the first of the top 10 100 narrative-based films on Letterboxd. So I'm assuming that it must be good if it's ranked among almost some of the best movies of all time.
Number 6, right?
Yeah. From when we drew it. I think it's still number 6.
Nice. Which we'll get into it. Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I do think that there are a lot of movies that are similar to this movie in essence. Now, do they do it as well as High and Low did it? That's another conversation. We'll get into it, but a top 10 movie was really exciting to draw.
For sure. So I'm going to let Parker get into the synopsis of the film.
So, yeah, Akito Kurosawa directed kind of 3 short films here and put it into one movie. So generally you have that 3-act structure and it's all following the same story. And of course, it's the same case here. We're following the same story the entire time. But he really broke it down into 3 very distinct acts that take on very different shapes. So High and Low was released in 1963. And it's kind of a classic crime thriller drama. And it kind of had some noir elements to it as well, which we'll get into. But it delves into a situation in which this shoe executive named Kingo Gondo has his son kidnapped from him in the middle of an all-important business deal where he's going to take over the company. And he needs all of this money up front. And he gets a ransom call. I have your son. Give me, $30 million? And he's
30 million yen, yeah.
Okay, I don't even have $30 million, but, it's my son. I need to get him back. Boom. No, not even his son. It's actually his chauffeur's son. And we learned that very early on. And so now Gondo is faced with this moral dilemma. Am I going to sacrifice myself, essentially, and my business and what I've built my whole life towards for my chauffeur's son, and not even guaranteed that I'm going to get him back safe? So it dives into his moral dilemma for like the first half of the movie. And then we move into like a whole manhunt crime thriller where we're following the police and we're following the culprit as he tries to escape their investigation. So we get a huge tonal shift in the middle of the movie, and I loved it. I thought that both halves of the movie were very entertaining in their own right. And they were very, very different in terms of pacing, flow, and the way that they were shot. But we'll get into that. I just want to hear first and foremost, overall, what are your general thoughts and feelings from this movie? What were your biggest takeaways? What did you like the most? And what were the highs and the lows? You already said it, but what were the highs and the lows, genuinely?
I didn't think, we had just watched like Lawrence of Arabia, and I didn't really think that we were going to get anything, because I know your top was Fanny and Alexander, and obviously like mine, and based off our list, was Lawrence of Arabia, but I didn't know we were going to get such a hard-hitting film this quickly. Because, once I started watching the film, it was like you were locked in and you couldn't stop. I thought this was the best movie we've seen so far.
Yep. And spoiler alert, not for the movie High and Low, but for this episode, just based off the conversation, you can already tell if you're listening, this is likely going to end up as our number one film that we've watched so far. For me, it had the highest rating. I personally did like it better than Fanny and Alexander, which I'm continuing to grow to love Fanny and Alexander, by the way. Like,
yeah,
the farther removed I get from it, the more I'm thinking about watching it again.
Dude,
so stay tuned.
You might have to up it up on your ranking a little bit on your
on lasting impression, right?
On your lasting impression, yeah.
So we'll see there. But yeah, High and Low, I do have my qualms with it, but I mean, it's a captivating story. It's very entertaining. It's a crime thriller, so you're invested the whole time. And it's shot beautifully. It's so well composed. It's so well organized in terms of what is being presented to you on the frame. And especially in the first half of the movie, a lot of the story takes place inside of Gondo's apartment, inside of that one room. And you have as many as 10 or 12 people inside of this room in frame at one time. And it goes back to something I think that I said about Fanny and Alexander, but the blocking in order to establish such a cool shot is really impressive here. Also, it's a black and white film, except for a couple of seconds, which was super cool.
That was one of the most iconic shots of the movie. That was crazy.
You want to dive into that just so we don't have to beat around the bush? Like what?
Yeah, let's get high, baby. But yeah, so again, a lot of this movie is shot in black and white. Well, predominantly, and I mean, obviously that was a creative choice because I mean it's the 60s. We already have a lot of movies in Technicolor, in color in general, but I feel like the black and white truly adds to the essence of the film. To your point, that it does feel like a film noir. It is a crime drama, and of what we've seen in the 30s through 50s. But this film just to your point, I didn't even think about that as oh, it's almost like he shot 3 short films and put them all together because, I mean, again, the beginning of the movie is predominantly shot at Gondo's place of residence. It's all just, you're watching him and the detective sit on the phone waiting for the kidnapper to call and give them more information and record. And I would have been fine if it was a movie that was just all based in the house. It would have made it very interesting, almost like watching a stage play.
Right,
but then
Sunset Boulevard. I don't know. Careful with what you wish for there, but
yeah, stage play. But again, then we get to all right, and it's kind of a really stupid take, but it's almost like when Gondo finally decided I'm gonna go and pay the ransom. Let's get this thing started. It's almost like he paid for the movie that we were actually going to be getting because then you see the budget. The scope of the movie just completely blow up. He was like, all right, here's 30 million and go make a crime thriller. And then it just dives deep into it. And we get, honestly, one of the best crime dramas I've ever seen.
Very entertaining for very little action. There's not a lot of action in this film.
So it made me think a lot of Shin Godzilla, which funny enough, this was produced by Toho, who also made Godzilla. But Shin Godzilla is a Godzilla movie, but it's kind of based in realism where a lot of the shots, it's almost chronological where it's you see Godzilla and you're kind of just you're seeing it all through the politicians and pretty much how the people would actually be dealing with it if it was based in real life. And that's kind of what we see here where once we get who the kidnapper is, we literally get that meeting of every single section of the police department being what do you have? What do you have? What do you have? Let's put it all together. Here's how we've mapped out the city to see where the kidnapper's place of residence is. All of those pieces kind of coming together was just, it was super fun to look at and was very satisfying when we got to the end, which, and this also kind of dives into some of the qualms that I have with the movie, is that they revealed the kidnapper pretty much almost immediately to the audience. Right there and then.
Well, it's about it is about halfway through the movie that you find out.
Yeah, which like I would have been fine with that if it was like, because at first I thought it was going to be, I thought it was the secretary
Me
who was
too.
playing the kidnapper at
Oh,
first.
wait. Let me pause you for a second. When you say the
Yeah.
secretary, are you talking about what's his name? Aoki, the one who's like his business partner for 10
No,
years and then
no,
switches to the
no. Aoki's the chauffeur.
no. Oh
The
yeah, Aoki was the show.
Kawanishi is the secretary. He's the one that Gondo was going to send to Osaka to go and
Yes,
put in that check.
that's what I meant. That's what I meant because I
Yeah.
also thought that it was him, Kawanishi, or
And
his
like that
partner.
would have been fine if they hadn't just revealed this random guy in the middle of the movie. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, whatever. And now it's just like we know kind of who the person is, and now it's just a matter of the rest of the crew or of the
Right.
police force to go and find him, which I would have liked that even more if we were just looking at it through the scope of the police. Like that's what I probably would have made that almost a perfect movie.
Like we find out when the police find out.
Correct, because that's kind of like how, like, back to my point of Shin Godzilla, it's like you find out everything in real time. Like you don't see, and there's nothing that the audience knows before the actual characters do.
Sure. That makes sense. And to be fair, while they show us the face of the kidnapper, I mean, it's essentially worthless. All it does is it tells you that it's not one of his business partners. It tells you that
Correct.
it's somebody random.
Which I
And
guess also would have subverted expectations. Like a lot of like these crime dramas that you see, it's always like, oh, it was this person. Wow, that's crazy. But
well, let's dive into why the film chose or why Kurosawa chose to have this as the antagonist of the film. But it's revealed that his inspiration, so to speak, for the crime that he commits is because he grows up struggling and essentially every day has to look up the hill and see this massive house of Gondo, the shoe company executive, and essentially feels looked down upon. So you get that, the high and low, the dichotomy of the wealthy and the poor, which is typically shown through film. And we've seen it a lot recently. Parasite, for example.
you know what was so funny? I was also thinking of Parasite while watching this movie.
And I wouldn't say there's not a lot similar between those two films other than the fact that there's the class distinction that is shown visually through height. I, of course, was thinking of Parasite watching because of that, but in no other way would I say that they're similar. But what did you feel in terms of the antagonist inspiration? Was it enough for you? Because he goes to some pretty serious lengths. I mean, he kills 2 people at some point in this movie. So, at 3 actually, and we'll get into the third because I have an issue with that whole plot point. But
So
just
that's
in terms of the morals, like did his motivation work for you? Because I'm on the fence.
kind of like, I think it was like, other than like that sort of distinction of like, oh, I'm literally like struggling in this, that it's hot in the summers, it's cold in the winters, but I see this house on top of the hill of like, this person never will know what my struggles are. But he's also like a medical intern, so I'm like, I don't know like what the class distinction is with that, or like how the pay level is, because I
Right.
mean like the medical field pays pretty highly in America, especially like if you're getting into that field,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it promises better pay
It has
in
a
the
high
long
ceiling.
run.
Sure.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but that might also just be his way in to, feed into whatever he's doing, because I mean we also learn later on that like he is pretty much like peddling like heroin to people
Mhm.
to get to what he wants, like to get them to what he wants to do in terms of like this grand scheme of taking down Gondo. But I don't really know, and we don't really get to learn a lot about him. His name is Takeuchi. We don't really get to learn a lot about him until literally like the very end of the movie. I feel like we don't really get to hear him, like we get to hear him speak like in the beginning of the movie, like he's talking to Gondo about like what's going on and like what he needs to do to like bring the kid back. But like after that, like we don't really get a lot more motivation besides like besides that. So I mean, it was interesting to like watch him, especially through that third act was really cool. But like other than that, we didn't really get to know a lot about this kidnapper and what his actual motivations were. I
Mhm.
believe. Like I felt like, I mean, again, the end, it's Gondo finally meeting like with the kidnapper for the first time because at the kidnapper's request, and he kind of just like starts going crazy because he's been like locked in the cell or whatever. But like that's pretty much like the extent of emotions that we get from that character. And while the acting in that scene was great, it didn't really help develop or make me like want to learn more about that character.
Sure. I would say for a character who serves as the main antagonist and whose inspiration for the crimes that they commit is a central theme of the film, the character did feel a bit on the flatter side to me in the sense that there weren't drastic circumstances that surrounded him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in movies such as this, typically you find the antagonist to be somewhat sympathetic, which was not the case whatsoever in
No,
this
like we didn't have time to
that's
really care
okay, that's
about him.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do wanna take a moment, though, to shout out the cast, that portrayed some of the characters that we're talking about. So, Takeuchi, the main antagonist, was played by Tutsuomo, Yamazaki, and forgive me because 'cause I'm probably going to butcher, some of these names. Our protagonist, Gondo, was played by Toshiro Mifune, and then, the chief investigator, which this is a good segue because I wanna talk about one of his main scenes. Um, the chief of investigation was played by, Takashi Shimura, and he has a scene in this movie. There's 2 of them, actually. One where the entire police force is inside of a room, and it's a long scene. And
Mhm.
essentially, he's calling out different portions of the investigation. So he will say, "Oh, so what do we have on the payphone?" And they're trying to determine what phone did our antagonist call Gondo from. Okay, and then 2 people will stand up, and they'll provide the research that they've done and an explanation as to why they're able to narrow it down to certain criteria that may, help to catch the kidnapper. And
Mhm.
it
And
goes
they
on.
also had shots of like them actually doing what they were
Right.
supposed to, which also added that element of like putting everything together. Like I thought that was really
And
cool.
that is a major portion. It's a major chunk of the second act of the movie, and it's really just people, like, for the most part, just people giving information, like, just saying words, and it was still so captivating because it did a really good job of basing their evidence in what you could believe to be reality. I thought that it was very easy to follow and was a
Yeah.
lot of fun to learn more about the case because a lot of the people in the room aren't aware of their colleagues' evidence. And that's the purpose of this meeting, is for them to all be on the same page. So it's a very effective way to get the audience on the same page too. Though I would imagine it's very challenging to write because that scene could very easily be boring 15 minutes of exposition dump that nobody wants to watch. And yet it was
Mhm.
one of the most captivating scenes in the entire film.
Yeah.
So I I think that the entire cast did a great job there, and there was great direction, great camera work, and that was probably my favorite part of the movie, and it very easily could have not been.
Yeah. And I get what you're saying. Like it also again helped with like, that we get those pieces together of like while they're talking, they get because this app to bring this up, like right before this happens is when we get the train sequence of when there's that exchange of the actual money that Gondo is going to be giving the kidnappers and how he wanted it to be like very precise, like 2 suitcases, 2.75 inches, which I was very surprised they used inches in a Japanese movie. But that it was enough to fit the window while the train is moving to slide it
Mhm.
out. Like, so like after which was one of the craziest sequences I've ever seen, to then now getting that part of the movie with all of this exposition. And it's like, I was almost kind of thinking like, oh, well, now we're going to take a break and get an exposition dump. And it's like, no, we're still going to continue this. It's just a little bit more realistic, but we're giving you more scenes of like, this is what I found out. These are all of the payphones like in this area, like by these trolleys that we heard on a recording while Gondo was talking to the kidnapper. Like, it's just, there was a lot of moving pieces and in a lot of like, I'm kind of thinking of like that like cork board with like all of the strings, but it's like you're watching it play out in real time, and it just made it very engaging. And that we continue that with like, figuring out a plan to get the kidnapper, getting more information to finally like now we're in a like kind of jumping into the third act, sorry, of like now we're dealing with like a heroin epidemic in Japan that like I wasn't really aware of.
Which is also so well shot. I mean,
oh my god, yeah, like when
it's
he's
probably
going
intentional, but that whole sequence is so well shot, and it almost for a second turns into The Walking Dead, dude. The way that
yeah, the dope alley, yeah,
the way that the addicts were directed to portray addicts was very zombie like and very. This sounds weird saying, but like very artistic. Like it was a very artistic sequence walking through the dope alley and kind of seeing
Yeah.
our everyday characters come across that portion of society, and again attributes itself to the whole point of the film, I think, in the first place, what it's trying to get across in terms of the dichotomy, because what Gondo is to our antagonist, these dope addicts are to him. And we see him taking advantage of people that are lower socially than he is. Yet that's his inspiration for committing these crimes in the first place. And Gondo didn't even do anything directly to him. So
Correct.
it's very interesting to see that the middle class, so to speak, of society taking advantage of the lower, yet being offended when the upper class does to them what they do to people below them.
Which was
So
crazy
interesting
because
little
then
thought.
you get that scene of what after he gets out of the club, which was also another like crazy scene. There's like
There's
literally
there's
so many people, and there's absolutely like no dialogue. Like he's literally just trying to figure out who's going to sell him drugs.
Mhm.
But like the way that it's like spaced out and the way that like the camera is tracking like everybody, there's so many moving pieces. But it's when he gets out of there, when he's about to go to Dope Alley and he sees Gondo, and you're just left sitting there like, okay, this is his prime objective. Like that is his main target. What the hell is he going to do?
Right.
And he literally just lights Gondo's cigarette and Gondo just walks away. So it's like, it kind of just shows what type of character he is, that like, you've done all of this behind the scenes. You were able to go and do this like anonymous over the phone. But now that you have your opportunity, like your target is right there. You are within like striking distance of your target and you can't commit.
But he doesn't want, I don't think that he wants to kill him. I don't think that that's his intention.
It's fair. I don't know. I just think it was just really interesting that like this guy that he has been messing with the whole time, that like he wants to see his downfall, is right there. And it's almost like he doesn't really know what to do. Like you just light his cigarette and he kind of follows him through, but like he kind of just stands there and just makes his way back to Dope Alley to where he really has power.
I just realized I don't think we ever explained what the color is in this film either.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, why don't you pick us back up on that too?
Yeah, so while they are getting everything set up for the train sequence, they're getting like, because the kidnapper specifically wants a specific type of briefcase, a certain dimensions, with a certain amount of bills, with like consecutive serial numbers. But while they're setting all this up, they start planting like these like chemicals or these devices to where they can locate it if it's been thrown in the water or incinerated. Specifically, there's a little like chemical in it that if it gets burned, it will burn in a pink smoke. And this is after we find out that he kills two junkies, and to kind of like throw him off, the police get up with the press to be like, don't put a story out about these two dead junkies. Put a story out that these two junkies spent 2,000 of his 3 million yen to get him to start worrying that, oh my God, they're onto me. So he now takes the briefcase, empties it out, and he throws the briefcase in an incinerator. And we cut to a little bit later, and Gondo's son says, oh, look at the pretty pink smoke. And when they open up these giant windows in Gondo's house, we see these smokestacks and everything is still black and white, but we just see these like almost kind of like neon pink smoke coming out of it. It was nuts to see that. Like, it was such a brilliant choice of like when to have color pop. Like, it made me think of like Schindler's List when we like see the little girl in the red dress in this all black and white movie. Like, it's picking color when it's necessary, and it was such a brilliant choice.
And you know what? When they had first said, "Oh, well, this here, if put in the briefcase, will burn pink when lit on fire, and this will set off a putrid smell if it's put in water." And I just remember thinking to myself, like, that's so dumb, dude. Like,
what do you mean?
These briefcases, like, if you were a smart criminal, like, they could be burned or put in water literally anywhere. And like, you're just thinking, but hey, it worked. It worked. So had to eat my thoughts on that one.
I guess he had no other place to put it. Like, it's not like he's got a fireplace, but he also probably didn't know that was actually happening.
Of course.
Like, this man thought of literally everything, like even to the point of like telling Gondo to not get the police involved. But like, how is he going to know that? Like, there's even a scene where he's like, "Oh, well, why do you have all your curtains closed? Why don't you open them?" And all the police just drop to the ground, and Gondo opens up all his windows and he goes, "Okay, I guess that's fine." So
yeah, that was another scene in which I was like, okay.
Like, you
can see clearly.
He thought of almost everything except that, like, why wouldn't this guy call the police? And if he did, if you have that in the back of your mind, like, I don't know.
I suppose, but correct me if I'm
he
wrong.
Was smart to a fault.
They called the police because it was the chauffeur's son, correct? I'm pretty sure that's the reason. So that's
I think they called the police.
But that's another major mistake that this guy makes too. I mean, he gets the wrong kid simply because he's dressed in a sheriff's costume. Come on. I think we're starting to get into the lows. There aren't very many of which, and then we'll hop into the rankings. But yes, he was literally kidnapped instead of Gondo's son because he was wearing the sheriff costume that Gondo's son usually wears, which is, I think, a little absurd. And they do explicitly state that in the film. So that was questionable, but obviously I like that in a movie such as this. Actually, you know what? Fuck that. This is the number 6 movie of all time. If there's a criticism for this movie, I'm gonna say it unapologetically because, hey, dude, if you're the number 6 movie of all time, like, you gotta be pretty,
Yeah, you gotta be
But
pretty.
yeah, what were your main points of contention with this film? Did you have any serious lows?
Not really, just mainly like the motivation of the antagonist. Like, I get like why he was doing it, but like we don't really get to like know the character. Like, I don't really think outside of the phone call that he has a lot of dialogue to really get us like invested in why he's trying to do this. Like, after the phone calls, we really just see a lot of shots of him like frantically reading the newspaper and just throwing like the luggage away, trying to get these drugs. Like, we don't really get much of him. And we got so much character development from everyone else, like Gondo. We think of him as this heartless being in the beginning of the movie up until he realizes that he's going to cough up this money. And then even like towards the end that like, he spent a lot of this time like trying to secure this empire with a company that he's been with since he was a kid, to now where he's okay with starting over and like doing his own thing, which I thought was really nice. But all we really got from the antagonist was, I don't like him because he's got everything that I want, and I'm just gonna go crazy at the end, and like, that's
right.
It.
If our antagonist were placed in Gondo's shoes, he would be a way worse person than Gondo. Like, Gondo's a pretty good dude, and he has a great arc throughout. I think that he develops in a really good way, where, like you said, he comes to accept reality for what it is, and at the end of the film, he gets his money back for the most part. He gets
27 million out of the 30 million.
And at that point, it's still, they're marking his furniture for auction. It's a little bit too little, too late.
Yeah, because I think like the 30 million that he was giving away like was sort of owed to like
And
to
but he kind
debtors.
of accepts it. And you see this shift from at one point in the film, he's saying, there's no way. I'm sorry, but I cannot pay this ransom, which I don't agree with, personally. And obviously, I'm not in Gando's shoes and it's a movie, but like, just pay the
No.
fucking ransom and worry about it later. Like,
Well, that was
someone's
something I thought
threatening to
was
kill your
interesting
chauffeur's
for.
kid,
I
you
thought
know?
that was something interesting that was brought up when with his wife a lot, because
Mhm.
they mentioned that like she has always known wealth. Like she is
Right.
the first one to just be like, Gondo, just give the money away. Like we need to save this kid, and he's just like, you don't know what it's like to start all over. Like I can do that because I've been at that point to build
Mhm.
myself up. You have only ever known wealth like since you were a kid. Like you grew up wealthy, you married wealthy. Like I will survive. You will not
Right.
survive like this kind of impact. And she never really sort of gets it. She's just continuing to harp Gondo about this money. But I thought again, like even with like the wife who like we only ever really see like in the first act, she gets this sort of character development and gets this sort of background to like make me think about what are the repercussions of what would happen if he gives that money away. But again, with the antagonist, we don't really get much except I just don't like living at the bottom of the hill.
Right. That's true. And then I'm having trouble finding what the name of the character was. But there
What
was
character?
another detective. Oh, Bosin. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
the older
So
detective.
I want to shout him out too, because we haven't mentioned his character yet. And I think that he also served a very interesting purpose in this film.
Hmm.
Because I'm thinking of in the first act when we're seeing Gondo go through his decision making process. And at the end of the day, it's really nobody's choice but Gondo's. And I thought that it was so well done the way that everybody, even if subliminally, you can tell the way that they lean on the issue and the impact that it has on Gondo in terms of who they are to him. So, of course, his business partner is outright says to Gondo and to the audience, there's no way that you can pay this ransom. We are in business together. We need this money to thrive. His wife,
Kind
obviously,
of.
who is explicit. Yes, of course, and there's more to that. But
Yeah.
and I think that Bosin the whole time was very interesting because he doesn't say anything explicitly to Gondo, but you can tell how empathetic he is as a character, even though he's kind of a hard-shelled detective. The way that the detectives in this film genuinely want to solve this case, I think, was an interesting. Um, it was just interesting. I thought it was really well done. The way that the actors portrayed their empathy towards the situation.
I almost kind of think that like they wanted to save the kid to like, well, because they always keep saying that like our top priority is the safety of the child.
Right.
But like as soon as they get the kid after the train scene, like they get so excited to be like, all right, the kid is good. Let's go catch the
And
kidnapper. Let's go figure this shit out.
And that leads into my least favorite part of this movie. And I'm going to save it for when we talk about suspension of disbelief in our
Yeah,
rankings, do you want to move into our rankings now?
we can. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty because this was one of the hardest movies. Like as much as I loved it, it was so hard to rank. But I'll give you my reasonings. We can start with rewatchability and enjoyability. I go ahead and I'm going to start this off with a 13 out of 15. This movie was enjoyable to watch through and through. And while I might not watch it, like obviously, like tomorrow, I could definitely go back to this movie and watch it. And like obviously, like knowing like who the kidnapper is and all of that, I would still have fun watching this movie.
Yeah, I don't think it would change much considering we find out who he is pretty early on and it's not a twist. So there's nothing really to look
Which
for.
I guess adds to the rewatchability because I mean, if we were left like at the end knowing who it was, we're kind of like, oh, like that's the big reveal. I feel like having it be earlier makes you like, all right, now we kind of like already know who it is, but how are we going to catch him? Which is
Right.
the most exciting part of the movie.
Yeah, it does serve as the shift in the tone of the movie. As soon as we find out who the killer is, then it turns into more of a detective type of movie instead of a close-knit kind of intimate type of film. It really broadens its scope in the second half. and that changes when we find out who the killer is. So yeah, obviously that has nothing to do with enjoyability and rewatchability. I thoroughly enjoyed moments of this movie, and I enjoyed at large the movie. But there were parts that I really liked. I give it a 12 because I don't think that it's something that I'm going to pop on like whenever, but I really enjoyed it. And I would watch it again. I don't know if I would go past a second watch within a very short period of time. But yeah, it was a great time. And I think that a second watch would probably be pretty rewarding as well. I want to go a little bit lower to an 11, but I'm going to leave it at a 12. I think that's good.
All right.
For its story, I also gave it a 12. And there was an aspect of this film in the third act that I didn't know if I wanted to subtract significant points from the story or significant points from the suspension of disbelief. And it could go from either. But I'll save it for now. On the whole, I thought that the story was very good and it was very diverse. I like that we get a lot of different genres in this one movie, and it all falls under the umbrella of a mystery, crime, suspense, noir type of film. So I think that it was very well done, very well told. It's a story. It's a kind of story that we see. Like, it's not an epic and it's not something that's totally out there. But it knows the story that it wants to tell, and it tells it very well.
And I agree with you there, but I'm a little bit overinflating because I gave it a 14 out of 15. Again, like to what you were saying. And again, this was so hard to rank, and I'll tell you my reasonings like towards the end, but I feel like
what you think
well,
about it.
I needed to justify because I genuinely loved this movie more than Lawrence of Arabia, but I gave Lawrence of Arabia such a high score
for story.
Well, just in total.
Okay.
But like have it be like in my mind, I'm like, I love this movie so much better than Lawrence of Arabia. But then when I first did my rankings, I'm like, but it's much lower than Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah, like, and we'll get to when we get to the total, I'll tell you what the original was because I have it typed in on my notes because it was just crazy. Like, it was me trying to see like what can I kind of think about more to push this score a little bit higher based on like how I feel about this movie. And I feel that because this is the highest score that I gave it in terms of like the numbers, obviously, but the story was just something I hadn't seen before. Like, it was this, like you said, 3-act structure, and I'm glad that you put it into words because I couldn't really think of it. It was almost like, again, like we had this almost like stage play in Gondo's house of just like everyone is here huddled around this telephone waiting for the kidnapper. Then we pay that ransom, and now it's like this action crime thriller, like kind of mystery. And then the third act is us just following this kidnapper through the streets of Japan and like seeing the seedy underbelly, which up until this movie, I had never really seen before. Like I haven't seen a lot. I would say like my scope of Japanese like media is very just focused on like Godzilla and anime. I hadn't really seen like and I know it's really stupid to say, but like I hadn't really seen anything like outside of that. So to see like a heroin epidemic like in Japan like blew my mind. Like I had never seen that before, because you have this idea of like what Japan is. It's like very forward.
It's also Japan in 63, to be fair. This is Japan in
correct, which it's still like very progressive. Like they just like, I mean, Hiroshima was not that long ago when you think about it. It was only maybe like 20 years ago. So but they're still like pushing forward and being progressive, and like to see like a seedy underbelly like that, like because obviously like you know that there's like crime, like you have the Yakuza like hiding in the shadows, but to see it right there in front of you was crazy to see. And I mean, again, like all the characters like continued to push the story in a way that made it engaging the entire time. Like I had never seen anything like that before. which bleeds into my lasting impression of this movie.
Well, I want to say real quick that it's
Yeah.
interesting that you did that with the rankings, because this ranking system allows for it, but you also get caught up sometimes where you rank it pretty objectively and you don't come out with the score that you want. And
yeah,
usually I will also go back and kind of do some adjustments here and there. That's I explained it in the last episode why I have the personal attachment category there in the first place. Is if you really want, like, hey, let me give it some extra, let me give it a 5 because I want this movie to have a high score. So
yeah.
I like that. Obviously, you have only used this system to rank like 6 movies, so you're still kind of getting a feel for it. But it's fun.
I've actually used it to rank like almost ever since you showed it to me. It's how I rank like every movie I go watch now.
I love it.
This is just like on the official, but I mean, I used it for Beetlejuice, Alien Romulus.
Nice,
I used it for Long Legs. Like, there's a lot of movies because it kind of gives you like a visual aspect of like, did I really enjoy this movie as much as I did? And then you kind of factor it into like how many stars you're going to give it on Letterboxd, and you're like, oh dang, like I thought it was going to be a 4. Like I thought Beetlejuice was going to be a 4, and now it's a 3.5. And I was like, oh well, all right.
Yeah,
but
and that's good. I like to have it be lower than rather than higher. I don't know. I'm an asshole or a snob for this, but like
you keep things even. You don't want to.
things
You
5
want to
stars
hold
very
your
often
higher
anymore.
scores for things you actually genuinely care about.
So sorry to interrupt for that little tangent, but
It's
dive into
okay.
what did you give it for a lasting impression?
So with lasting impression, I mean, the story, like, again, lasting impression is always very interesting to kind of score because we just watched this movie not too long ago. We're still chewing on it, but again, I feel like I would rather, as much as we were chewing on A Separation or like Fanny and Alexander, like I feel like this is a movie where it's like I can enjoy watching this and continue to be like super excited to watch it. In terms, if I want to go and watch it like years from now, I can be like, I can remember what it was like to watch the movie in that point in time.
Right.
Mainly because I was watching this movie on a beach with my AirPods in. But like,
yeah, you're crazy for that.
Hey man, it was a good time. I will never forget sitting on the beach watching this Japanese crime thriller. It was awesome. But yeah, so I gave it a 13 out of 15 for my lasting impression.
So from my perspective, this movie is definitely more entertaining than say Lawrence of Arabia or Fanny and Alexander even. It's definitely more of a contained story in which there's less ambiguity. You know what it is you're watching. However, I will say that in my opinion, it doesn't give you as much to chew on, and it didn't leave me with like an emotional gut punch or thought provocation. However, I think it still is something that I'm going to look back on and like, how can you not like, it's kind of like the grandfather of like these types of films. Like we see a lot of movies that are similar to this today in terms of crime thrillers where there's kind of a lot of characters. There's a big manhunt going on throughout a city, and you know, the investigative team has information that some of which is shared with the audience. Then we eventually catch the bad guy. I gave it an 11 because I think that for its genre, it's hard for this genre to have a big lasting impression when it comes to emotion or intellect. However, I think it has a lasting impression on the genre at large.
Yeah.
And I think that Kurosawa obviously has had a massive lasting impression on the way that movies are made in the first place. So I couldn't really go any lower than an 11, but it didn't leave me with nearly as much to chew on mentally as Fanny and Alexander, for example. So a little bit lower on that front, but not incredibly because it still holds its own for obviously for generations. So for visual and auditory appeal, I think this was probably my hardest one to give a score on because it's freaking well made. Like it is so well made and it is so beautiful. And there are some great visual cues that take place. I think that the score, the music that we got was good, not great. And it was kind of like a noir style score, which I think really built the atmosphere. And in one instance, when they're raiding the compound where they think that the antagonist is going to be, and instead they find the two dead addicts. The suspense that the score built in that scene was incredible. So I think it's visually stunning. The blocking was great in terms of the frame. It looked really good. The music wasn't fully there. I'm going to give it a 9. I am leaning both ways. I could be comfortable giving it an 8, and I could be comfortable but slightly less comfortable giving it a 10. I'm good on right there at a 9 because Kurosawa does it very well, man. I mean,
I was going to say you're going to lean to a 10 when we gave Lawrence of Arabia a 10.
Look, see, that's why I don't give this a 10, but I think it's close. Like, I think that it is masterfully constructed from a visual standpoint.
Correct. And I feel like it's all just based on like what you're going for in that movie.
Exactly,
like for Lawrence of Arabia, it's like
obviously not
has to be that big because of the story, and the music has to be that way because of the period. Like this, it's like it's kind of more based in reality. Like you're wanting to just focus on what you're looking at, and the music kind of just like it's not the forefront. It's just kind of adding more atmosphere to what you are already watching. I'm
going to give it an 8. Change it to an 8.
Okay.
Because I gave Fanny and Alexander a 9, and I think that there was a little bit more that was visually compelling in Fanny and Alexander. There were some tracking shots that I really liked in the third act of Fanny and Alexander.
Yeah.
And I think that it just gave me a little bit more to look at.
Gotcha.
So I'm thinking an 8 there. Yeah.
Well, that's fine because I also gave it an 8. Again,
it hurts.
To your point, like I know, but it's mainly just because like a lot of the shots, like there's this movie, like you said, is shot beautifully, and a lot of the shot, like there's a lot of shot decisions that work, like the pink smoke, like the shot that I have like for the thumbnail of this video, which I picked it because it looked cool. I didn't like really know the context behind it, but now that you see it, it's when he's looking at that addict that's having withdrawals in Dope Alley, and it's kind of like that. It's kind of looking like that anime shot, dude. And I'm sorry to say it, but like it's like almost like he's like a silhouette, and it's just shining on the frames of his glasses. Like it's this very intimidating shot of him looking down at this woman who is having withdrawals from heroin. It's such a cool shot. And just like a lot of the other shots, like there was a lot of shot selections that looked really nice. But again, like the visual has to go in part with the auditory. Like I think like giving something like a 10 to Lawrence of Arabia, it's like the music and the shots have to have some sort of forefront and work together in such perfect harmony for me to give it a higher score.
Mm-hmm.
But going into that, I gave this movie for pacing, I gave it a 9 out of 10. I was almost leaning towards a 10.
Me too.
I was very, very close to doing so. I feel like the ending, like as iconic as it was to like have these two forces come together, it kind of just like almost put me out of it. Like just seeing this antagonist kind of act like a little Joker person, like it didn't really hit as much as I wanted it to. But again, the rest of the movie, like its transitions were like seamless. Like you didn't just like jump on this train. Like you knew what was going to happen. It felt natural, and it kept you engaged throughout the entirety of the film. That's why I gave it a 9.
Yeah, to your point, and actually a note that I made right when this movie ended.
Right when this movie filmed back in 1963.
It's not a very gratifying movie. Like you don't feel super satisfied when it ends. Like yes, I mean these things happen, and you know they get their guy, but you're left with like a little bit of okay. Story is over, right? Essentially, like Gordo will go on and try and restart. And
I honestly thought it was going to end when we were at Gordo. I keep wanting to say Gordo. Gondo's. When we were at Gondo's house, like when we told him, okay, we got you the money back, and now we're seeing all of these pieces getting auctioned. I thought that was going to be the end of the movie. I was like, okay, that I'm fine with. Like we have a resolution. The guy got caught. We literally almost saw him kill himself trying to put like some heroin in his mouth. Like that would have been great. But then we get that interaction, and it was kind of like, oh, like, okay,
So
sure.
yeah, I also gave the pacing a 9 though. I did lean towards a 10. I was engaged the whole time. And like you said, the transitions between story beats were really well done. Because this, like I said, the scope of the movie does kind of change on a dime, but it works. It works pretty flawlessly. And I was grooving with the movie the whole time. It's a little bit on the longer side. I think this movie runs like 2 hours and 23 minutes.
Yeah.
And it feels like maybe a 2-hour movie, but it moves right along. And there were really no points where I was like, I'm not really interested. So,
Yeah. Me neither.
yeah, 9, close to a 10 for sure. Speaking of, I also gave acting a 9. I think that the performances here were so good. There was no one took it took me out of it. Especially Gondo. Let me pull up his name again. But the actor that portrayed Gondo, Toshiro Mifune, throughout the film, he has to portray a lot of different emotion. He's put in a lot of different circumstances, and he carries his character through the entire time. I don't necessarily know what's keeping me from giving it a 10. My thought process is if I'm going to give it a 10, I know I'm going to give it a 10. Like I feel fully confident in that decision.
Yeah.
And I don't quite, so I'm leaving it there at a 9.
I also gave it a 9, and I can tell you exactly why, because everybody was playing their part pretty spot on. Like you said, like these characters had a lot of things to juggle, but there wasn't real, like, besides Gondo, besides Takura, besides the chauffeur, like there wasn't really a lot of depth when it came to like again a lot of the characters, because the whole focus of it is
Yeah.
like, yes, you have these characters, but you're also trying to push this mystery and this story along.
There's also a lot of characters to begin with.
Exactly, that too. And I feel like if we were to give it a 10, it would, I feel like a smaller ensemble with strong performances throughout is something that would push me to give it a 10. And again, just Takeuchi, like the kidnapper, like that, like final scene of his, like it was just so, I kind of thought it was
gave me
silly.
a little bit of the end of a separation where he's like,
Yeah, with the dad.
yeah.
Yeah, he's like headbutting people in the hospital. Like that was the kind of vibe I was getting from him towards the end, especially when he's like freaking out. He kind of like humps the fence. Which I kept rewinding that as I was like audibly laughing on the beach watching that, because he just like jumps up, grabs the fence, and just like pelvic thrusts towards Gondo. And I'm like, why was that a choice you made?
Yeah.
Like, it just, that part, like, it especially like towards the end, like we had such a great time in this movie. I was so engaged. I was ready for it to just have such a satisfying ending. And then that happened. And then the title card for end happened. I'm like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
So like that part kind of took me out of it, but I'm still giving it a 9 out of 10.
It definitely could have ended a little bit earlier, in my opinion. Like to your point, what you had mentioned when we were talking about pacing, I think it could have ended a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think so. But
So
I'm sticking with a 9.
Disbelief, because this is where I had the most issue with the film. And honestly, I foreshadowed it. I could have taken it from the story, but I want to hear what you had to say first.
So this was the one where I was kind of having to like push, like, do I really want to give it a higher score to help this movie, like to help me score it outright? Because I gave it a 9 out of 10 solely because like throughout, like, again, you are engaged in this movie the entire time. Like there wasn't really a point that like took me out of it until literally the end. Like throughout the entire time, like I could have felt like we were just like watching this crime beat, like this crime drama, and everything is going perfectly. Like we're getting a good visual aspect of what's happening behind the scenes of like what's everybody got going on, like the gathering information, or even like when the police are trying to like deal with the press as to what they can release and what can't they release to like kind of help both parties. Like we want you to have your story, we want you to have money, but we also want to catch this guy. Like it still kept me engaged into the story, and it never really took me out of it until the very end.
Okay. So I give suspension of disbelief a 6, and there is something that happens. like a choice that is made in this movie that honestly kind of pissed me off. Like why did that why did that happen? And they have the kidnapper caught outright, essentially, and they decide to try and set him up so that they can get him on more severe charges.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they directly lead to the death of another person because they refused to take him in and try and charge him for the deaths of the 2 addicts that had already died earlier in the film without their intervention. So my thought process is, as a smart investigator or as a competent police force, why are you going to try and trap him for murder or for dealing illicit drugs or any higher charge than kidnapping when he's already murdered 2 people and you could probably get him on counts of murder in that instance? So
because they specifically said that like they couldn't directly track him to the 2 murders, because I mean from what it looked like, it was just 2 junkies that injected heroin and overdosed.
and this
Like
is
there
true,
wasn't.
and I think that it would be difficult. I think it would be difficult, but I personally, and again, this is where I could subtract it from story, and I'm still wavering, but I wouldn't have minded watching them try to link him to those murders. Find a way for us to do that without a protagonist, someone we're rooting for, trying to set him up and literally leading to the death of another member of your society that you're sworn to protect as
But
an officer.
what's more exciting to watch on a movie?
I understand, but this is
Yeah.
also where like there's gonna I don't- as someone watching a film, these are some things that kind of take me out of it, and I'm thinking, okay, hold up a moment. Like, yeah, I get that it's gonna be fun to watch, but this is not that movie. Like, this is a movie that took its time and really did what it could to make us give it a high score in suspension of disbelief, because the investigation is thorough. They explain their evidence. It all makes sense. Nothing is, super out of the ordinary. All of the evidence that is brought into the police feels like it legitimately was found organically. Nothing
Yeah.
felt very convenient to the plot. And I think that it did a very good job of maneuvering a case that could have a lot of major plot conveniences that just kind of happen up out of nowhere. It did a really good job of not doing that. So why in this movie that's so grounded in reality is such an absurd decision made just for the sake of entertainment? So that is definitely my biggest gripe with the movie, is that character decision. I think it felt out of place for the character. I think it felt out of place for Bosin to go along with it, because they seem such genuinely empathetic people. And I get that they want him to have a longer sentence. But again, they were directly responsible for the death of this addict. I understand they didn't kill her directly, but had they arrested him, that
But
would
if there
not
was
have
no
happened.
intervention, she probably would have continued living.
So I get it. It was entertaining to watch, but the foundation of that entertainment did take me out of it a bit, because I wish that there was a way that they could have maneuvered it to where it seemed more realistic for those empathetic characters. So that's why I knock it down. I still like the movie a lot at large, but I did have a major gripe with that decision that was made. For originality, we've seen some wholly original films. Fanny and Alexander is one of the most unique things I've ever watched, in my opinion. This is very similar to a lot of things I've watched, but it still did it in an original way. And of course, this movie was made in '63, so before most movies in this genre that I have watched to begin with. This movie also is loosely based off of a book, which I don't really knock it for in terms of originality. I think that you can still do an adaptation in an original way, and I think that they did. I give it an 8 because there was nothing that I was like, wow, like that is, whose brainchild is this, right? There's sometimes you watch things, you're like, how did you even create this in your mind? This movie is not that, in my opinion, but it still tells its crime, thriller, drama story in an original way for the most part. So I feel comfortable landing it there at an 8. Really good for its genre, but nothing that blew my mind in terms of originality.
So it was another thing that I was kind of bouncing around with, either giving it an 8 because I originally did, and then I'm like, I need to push this movie forward, and I thought about just the structure of this movie, the flow of this movie, the kind of base, like it grounded in reality of this movie, to an extent, helped me push this a little bit forward where I could feel comfortable with giving it a 9 out of 10. Just because, like, yes, to your point, like this feels almost like every single like episode of Law and Order SVU that we see. We get the crime, we go through all of this, like we go through all of this like work to get all the pieces we need to like build a case and build evidence, and then we find the guy, we try him, and yeah, and it's 45 minutes out the window, but it's like in terms of an SVU episode. But again, it's like we don't get
I don't think
SVU.
Kurosawa was basing his script off of SVU.
Yeah, dude. Yeah,
He's a time traveler.
Got a Detective Benson. You got all your beats there. But Dick Wolf would not be Dick Wolf without Kurosawa and High and Low. And I feel like, while yes, we have seen this story before, there's a reason why it's so high on this list or on the Letterboxd list. Because I feel like, to your point, this is like the grandfather of crime dramas. Like it kind of teeters the line of like a Humphrey Bogart film noir while also keeping it a little bit more modern. Like there's things I could see in there where I'm like, oh, that could happen today. Like I'm not looking at a Humphrey Bogart like film noir and just being like, oh yeah, that's relatable. I'm like, no, that shit's almost like 80 years old. Like there's nothing I can really relate to it. But like this feels a lot more modern and it feels a little closer to home. Funny because this was filmed on an island almost 1,000 miles away from
it does have a timeless feel to it, though. I mean,
it does. It has a very timeless feel to it.
Yeah.
But again, then that's why I would justify giving that a 9 out of 10.
So I'm gonna go ahead and guess here that you gave Personal Attachment a 5 out of 5.
Nope.
What? How? If you're trying to bump it
because it was all I needed. I only needed 4.
Okay.
Because and that was the thing, like to your point, the Personal Attachment is literally that little bump that you want to give it to like maybe push it. I gave Lawrence of Arabia an 87 total when I looked at it. And when I did this ranking originally, and I'm going through, I'm giving my rankings, I'm like, oh, this movie's awesome, I'm going to give it this number and this number and this number, and then I get to the total and I had it at a 75.
Be careful not to set a trap for yourself, because what happens next if you watch a movie, you're like, oh, I like this so much better than High and Low. And you're like, shit, I gave High and Low high score because I wanted to beat Lawrence of Arabia.
Well, that's the thing that I'm worried about when we get to like The Godfather Part 2.
Sure.
Which I have seen before. So I'm like, I kind of have an idea of it, but I'm not watching it through this scope. But I feel like there's going to be things that I'm going to probably push forward. And I'm just, again, it's my grave and I'm digging it, but that's what I'm sticking it with. Like, thanks, Lawrence of Arabia. You really put me in the pickle here. But
before I dive into my personal attachment, which I don't have much to say, I do want to add a note to what you're saying in terms of bumping up scores. So oftentimes I'll come across like a movie that I gave a higher score than a movie that I like better than the movie with the higher score. And typically that movie that I like better does have a higher score in enjoyability and rewatchability. And that's kind of how I'll determine like my favorite movies, because my favorite movies are not always the best movies. I mean, that goes for anyone. So I have found throughout, I'm an insane person. I've been doing movies like this for like the past 2 or 3 years. And I just find it often happens that my favorite quote unquote movies have very high scores in enjoyability and rewatchability, and a very high score in attachment, and that will help its numbers, so to speak. But yeah, favorite and best is not always one and the same. So
no, like you can respect what the movie is doing and what you can,
right?
And
like,
yes,
and I think that what we're trying to do is like find a good blend of that. Like, yes, we want to give our personal opinions because we're the ones talking about the movies and watching them, and of course, you're going to have your personal biases while also staying true to an objective nature and not just shitting on a movie that objectively is great just because we were kind of bored with it. But with all that being said, I give Personal Attachment a 3. I'm like middle of the road with it. I really liked it. I think that it's one of my favorite movies of this genre that I've seen. But it's not at that 4 or 5 level where I'm like fully like I'm gonna go tell a bunch of people about this movie. Just offer it like, hey, I meet you on the street. Let me tell you about High and Low. Like it's not there, not quite there for me.
Like, let me tell you, do you like reading subtitles?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about this movie.
Is this our first film that averages out to a score above 80?
I think so. It is. It has
Nice.
beaten out Lawrence of Arabia. So what we'll do is we will move everybody down there.
We always get to this point in the episode, and then I remember, we still got to spin the wheel. And I'm like, let's go.
You sure do, buddy. So that was 1963, and we gave that an 83. Yeah.
Dang, the 60s coming out strong so far.
I know. So that leaves us now with our highest ranked movie is High and Low, the number one.
I feel good with this list. I mean, I
know you don't because Fanny and Alexander is.
Well, I switched Fanny and Alexander and Lawrence of Arabia.
In your personal list.
Yeah, and then otherwise, I think that this is a good list. I'm loving it so far. It's starting to come together where films actually have rankings based off what we thought about them, as opposed to just because we watched them early.
No, I get it, and
once
I can't wait till this builds to a top 10.
I'll be really excited to see our first 10 ranked.
That would be.
Let's spin the wheel, baby.
Sure. Let's go.
Oh my
best
gosh.
time.
I'm sorry.
Best time of the year.
Where I can read some of the titles.
I know, right? Well, I just saw The Dark Knight pass by. Oh my god, so nervous. All right, buddy. So we've left High and Low, high in the rafters. Let's see how our expectations for this next movie are. They're going to be high. They're going to be low. We're going to see what happens. Are you ready, buddy?
It's going to be another Kurosawa film. Just watch.
Could you imagine we get the 7 Samurai? But again, another top 10 film. But other than that, let's get it done.
Oh boy. Where's the sound effect?
We'll add it in post.
What did it land on?
What did it land on?
Oh my god.
Oh no! Another Japanese film.
Well, not only that, we're gonna have to watch the first one.
Yeah, so this is great because we can now bring up this established rule that we've kind of had behind the scenes, because this also is going to fall into the Lord of the Rings, because that's also on this list, like all 3 of them. So when we get like a trilogy or like sequels, as we also have The Godfather in here, that if we get a sequel, we will be watching the first one.
And in this case, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we agreed to, in this case, we are going to be watching and only watching The Human Condition 1, because it is also on the top 100 list.
Correct. I think all 3 human conditions are on there.
Right, but we're not going to be watching all 3 of them for the next episode.
No, correct.
We're going to default to The Human Condition 1, which is actually, it's number 17 right now on the top 100 list. And then we will have to spin again to get The Human Condition 2. And we'll watch that naturally as it occurs.
Of course. That's exactly what I think. So in terms of that, we have...
Which now I'm excited, because I'm excited to dive into this trilogy. I mean, it's...
So this is what we're left with. So we've spun The Human Condition 2, but we will be watching the first Human Condition, which is called No Greater Love, filmed in 1959 by Masaki Kobayashi. The immortal story. After handing in a report on the treatment of Chinese colonial labor, Kaji is offered the post of labor chief at a large mining operation in Manchuria, which also grants him exemption from military service. He accepts and moves to Manchuria with his newlywed wife.
It's
Manchuria. Shut up. With his newlywed wife, Michiko. But when he tries to put his ideas of more humane treatment into practice, he finds himself at odds with scheming officials, cruel foremen, and the military police. So another exciting, emotional roller coaster of a film for sure. But I'm excited to get into it. This is the first time that we get to actually establish that rule of sequels and trilogies. So it's going to be fun.
And
we'll see how it goes.
I think there are some sequels on here in which the original film is not on the top 100, in which case we will watch the original film first and then watch the sequel and only review the sequel because the first is not on the list.
Like Dune.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean that's going to be a whole other thing. I don't think Star Wars we're going to do though. Like
no,
Empire, I guess we'll just.
You're incredibly familiar with Star Wars, and I can watch a YouTube video and catch myself up.
Speaking of a YouTube video, you can watch about Star Wars.
yeah. I know what channel I'm going to.
Correct. But
so I'm excited. I'm excited to dive into the human condition, though. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm excited because, I mean, hey, man, we're definitely digging into the films that are on this list. You know, like when you.
That's the whole point of this show.
That's one way to say it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But we are I mean, these are like films. This is cinema.
This is Martin Scorsese's cinema. This ain't no MCU.
This will be great. This will be great.
But I'm so glad whenever we get to go on and talk film, especially this one. This one I was really excited to go and dive deep with you into. So it's gonna be fun to see how we get into the human condition. But until then, Parker, where can people find you?
Yes, of course. So you can find me on Letterboxd at. I always need to pull up my Letterboxd username.
It's literally your name.
Yeah, I always forget if my last name and first name is switched or not. But you can find me on Letterboxd at Parker_Paget. Go ahead and drop a follow on there. I'll probably follow you back. But yeah, just live, love Letterboxd.
Live, love Letterboxd. You can also find me on Letterboxd, ETZIO911 for like my personal Letterboxd. You can also find the LetterBros Letterboxd account at LetterBros Pod. I think that's what it's called, right? Oh no, it's just LetterBros. So you can find LetterBros on Letterboxd, just as the way it says of the title of this podcast. We'll be posting like the channel's review of the movies we've been watching, but you can also look at our personal reviews of these movies that we've been watching on our Letterboxd accounts. But you can also find me on Batuboy, BATUUBOII on Instagram, YouTube, for all your Star Wars needs. But I also will be posting about the channel on there as well. But until then,
well, and quick shouts as well, because you did start, and this has obviously been out now because we're pre-recording and all that. But LetterBros Pod on Instagram as well is a place that you can find the podcast.
Yes. So can't believe I forgot to mention that. Sorry. Yeah. So you'll find reels, find best ofs from the pod on there. Find some funny moments on there that we enjoy. So make sure to follow and make sure to go and rate this 5 stars and leave a review if you really liked it. Tell us what we're doing right. Tell us what we could be doing differently. But again, Parker, it's always a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. And yeah, to your point, we're definitely continuing to grow and kind of find our footing in this show, I think. So stick with us, and we appreciate anyone that's given it a watch. But it's always a good time talking movies with you, Felix.
Absolutely. And until next time, we will see you at the movies.